Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Many of you participated in the election protection program that our coalition ran this fall, and frankly, it's been going on for some time. Thank you so much for all your work. Many others may just be interested in this project. Thank you, too. Prior to Election Day, Common Cause, MassVOTE, the League of Women Voters, the Lawyers Committee, which is the lead organization for election protection hotline and for the program, and the ACLU worked together to recruit volunteers. We had 180 grassroots volunteers in the field and about 150 legal volunteers. Who were both roving and at the hotline, which was run out of WilmerHale. We met with election workers. We did a number of things to train and get ready for the program. And Rasan will tell you a little bit more about how it all went here in Massachusetts. The purpose of the call is to talk about what happened, what we learned, and what's next. Thank you again for joining. And today you'll be hearing from me, Pam Wilmot from Common Cause, Massachusetts. I'll be talking about the national picture and what's going on in the State House. At the end, I'll be serving as your moderator. Rasan Hall from the Lawyers Committee, who will be speaking about Massachusetts overall. Chris Robarge from the ACLU Massachusetts, who will be speaking about his work in Worcester. Aaron Goldman from the Springfield Institute will talk about what happened out in the western part of our state in Springfield. Cheryl Crawford will go over possible reforms that we need to look at. I will cover very briefly prospects for reform at the State House, and then we'll do some question and answers. We will get you out of here in an hour. So thanks again. So I'm going to speak now just briefly about the national picture. I hear somebody clanking around. I think that's Tyler. You have to do something about that. There was some good news and some bad news in the national election. Certainly the run-up to the election looked very concerning. We had a spate of deceptive practices, everything from billboards appearing that said that you could get arrested for voter fraud in minority neighborhoods, to voters being told that they could vote by phone, that their election day was Wednesday instead of Tuesday, that they had to have voter ID to vote, that their ballot was already in the mail and they couldn't go. You know, the list went on and on. Then there were also a whole spate of attempts to suppress the vote through more institutional means, like voter identification laws, which passed in a number of states, laws tightening up and restricting early voting, other ones restricting provisional ballots, you know, down the list, and it was very, very concerning. And the result of these were that, indeed, several states did end up strengthening their voter ID laws. We had huge lines across the country, up to 6 hours in Miami-Dade. Because of early voting cutbacks, some voters were in early voting lines until 2:30 a.m. There was not enough language assistance. There was problems with provisional balloting. But there was also some good news. We did have slightly lower turnout than we had in 2008, but not extremely so. Actually, more ballots are still being counted as we go. And we did have some uptick in the number of Latino voters coming to the polls. Young people went to the polls just slightly more than previously, and African Americans held their percentage at about 13%. A ballot question that would have made photo identification to vote a requirement in Minnesota was defeated, even though it started out at 80% support. It was clear that election protection programs across the country had a big impact, in reducing the amount of voter intimidation and things that we saw on Election Day. So all in all, there was a lot going on, and we all made a huge impact. I'm hoping that Rasan is on here, but it doesn't look like he is. Oh, you are?
I am.
Oh, and I can hear you, too.
Yes.
All right. You're on next. Then you'll be talking about what is going to be happening in the national picture.
Okay. Well, I guess there in Massachusetts, there was some good news in that turnout was up in Massachusetts, and overall, I think the overall sense was that the voting experience that most Massachusetts citizens had was a good experience. We had over 600 calls to the 1-866 Our Vote hotline, which, as Pam mentioned earlier, is a national program run by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, and we, as one of the affiliates here in Boston, run that program and collaborate with our grassroots partners as well as the legal community here in Boston. And so we had upwards of 150 legal volunteers out in various locations promoting the number, but also assisting people. And so most of those 600-plus calls that we received were largely related to issues of voter registration and polling location. There were a lot of individuals that were trying to determine whether or not they were registered or whether or not they were registered for their address where they're currently living. And there were also calls that we received for people to find out where they should be voting. But we also received a significant number of calls regarding confusion over voter identification, but also complaints about poll workers providing the wrong information about voter identification requirements. As you know, in Massachusetts, there's no need for a photo ID for the purposes of identification, but there were individuals being told that they needed to provide a driver's license or some form of photo identification. There were also concerns around the lack of or inaccessibility of language assistance. There are certain jurisdictions in Massachusetts that are required to provide language assistance, and in some of those locations there was no language assistance available, or it was very difficult to get the language assistance either because of limited resources, there was only one person available, or if there were a large number of individuals needing language assistance. And finally, there were some significant concerns in some locations around the refusal of some poll workers to provide provisional ballots, when in fact voters should have received provisional ballots. So again, the registration inquiries and polling location inquiries were some of the most significant call, or the largest number of calls that we received, but those other issues with photo identification, provisional ballots, and language assistance were also calls that we received that were of some concern. One of the difficulties we ran into in trying to address this is some of the local municipalities were inaccessible during the election day. The city or town clerk's office would have provided a number, but there were oftentimes those numbers were busy. There were some municipalities that were very responsive and very helpful, but there were a few that had some significant issues that needed to be addressed and were not accessible. I think one of the things that would have been a tremendous benefit to us in the work that we were doing is if there were a statewide voter registration lookup that were available not only to us but to anybody. That would have eliminated over 50% of the calls that we received. So that's a snapshot of what the experience in Massachusetts was like from the 1-866 Our Vote hotline perspective.
Great. Thank you, Rasan. Now, before we go to Chris, and hopefully we'll be able to hear him, I'm going to do a little something, which is to ask folks to respond, which we can do while Chris is. It's very simple. A little question here, which asks your experience with election protection, if you served, of whether you enjoyed it or whether it wasn't so good. So feel free to do that while Chris is speaking, and Chris will speak briefly about Worcester, and then we'll hear very briefly about Springfield. Chris, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So in Worcester, we had a very robust turnout in terms of both people going to the polls, and also we had a lot of response in terms of folks who came out and volunteered for us on Election Day. Turnout was very heavy. I believe it was slightly higher than in 2008. We were able to cover a little over half of the physical polling locations in the city, which was pretty remarkable, and things overall went fairly well. A couple of things I wanted to highlight. The big issue that we had been preparing for in Worcester was the issues that we had experienced in years past, and in particular in the September primary, which was specifically dealing with observers from other groups who were coming into polling places and sort of creating an intimidating and hostile presence, and challenging voters directly, and yelling at them that they couldn't speak Spanish in the polls, and those sorts of things. So the biggest news that I wanted to report to anyone who wasn't already aware of it is that between September and November, when we were able to put so many folks out at the polls, particularly in the target locations, there was little to no voter intimidation done by observers on Election Day, which was a huge change from September and a huge victory. And the city did implement some measures to help to prevent that stuff from happening. But I want, in particular, for the folks who are on the line who volunteered for us in Central Massachusetts, I want all of those folks to know that it was because you were there. That was a huge reason why this didn't happen in November. The same folks were out there. They were bouncing around from polling locations. I saw them. They were looking for an opportunity where they might be able to get into a location where we weren't watching, and they were not able to find one. So it was because of you that happened. So thank you. In terms of things that we did have issues with, one of the biggest issues consistently that we have in Worcester is around the inactive voter problems, and with folks being asked to sort of have to jump through additional hoops. Folks are asked to provide proof of residency. Oftentimes they're actually asked for ID or for a driver's license, more concerningly. So we sort of wind up with a de facto show ID to vote situation. They're also being asked to fill out affidavits. And when you had turnout like we had on November 6th, you have people being stuck in these huge bottlenecks waiting to fill out paper affidavits and to show their ID to a warden. So that was an issue that did create a lot of voter delays. Another issue that we had was multi-precinct locations. We have a few, including 2 locations in Worcester that encompass 3 precincts. The worst problems that we saw here overall on Election Day were at 128 Providence Street, which is our senior center, and that serves 3 precincts. And the issue that we were having was there was no one outside of the precinct area that was telling people what line they needed to get in. So in the morning, everyone was being sent to one line, waiting in this huge line. 2/3 of those folks were then finding out that they didn't belong in that line, and they had to go stand in another line. So we didn't have anyone there. The city didn't have anyone there directing people to where they should have been going, which could have solved a lot of problems there. So that was a major issue. It was an issue in other places as well, but it was the worst at the Providence Street location. And then other, smaller issues that we had, revolved around the typical stuff with people being given provisionals who should have been given challenge ballots, people being asked for identification when they should have been asked for proof of residency and those sorts of things. But overall, things did go fairly well here in Worcester, and again, I want to really underscore the fact that that was in large part because of the volunteer effort that we had here. So thank you to everyone who participated.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Aaron, let me unmute you very quick. There you go.
Hi, folks. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm really psyched to be here. And we had a great team of poll observers in Springfield on November 6th. ACLU Lawyers Committee, the Alliance to Develop Power, Neighbor to Neighbor, SEIU, us, the Springfield Institute. Great team, and it was a blast coordinating, helping to coordinate all of that. Unfortunately, on November 6th, Springfield botched another election. You may know there's a history of problems in Springfield. In 2006, the Department of Justice sued the city over language access issues, and as a result, there was a settlement order. A lot of the stuff in the settlement order is no longer being done. Some of it was actually never being done. For that reason, a group of us were able to successfully petition the Department of Justice to send a team last year for election. They collected a wealth of incriminating information. Unfortunately, they have yet to share the findings of their research, but we do know that much from our communication with staff attorneys. This year, again, a host of problems. The biggest was that at least 3 polling places that we know of ran out of ballots by mid-morning. And the polling places shut down for up to 52 minutes while they waited for replacements. And the excuse given was the overwhelming turnout, which is true. There's a lot of high turnout in Springfield and everywhere. But according to Mass General Law, Chapter 54, Section 45, every polling place is required to have enough ballots for every single registered voter, essentially anticipating 100% turnout when they open at 7 a.m. So no matter how high turnout is, there's no excuse for running out of ballots 9 hours before the polling place is closed. And in addition to that, I mean, I'd encourage you to check out our full report, which is still the lead story on our website, which is springfieldinstitute.org. But the other big problems include groups of voters confused and being sent from polling place to polling place, or waiting on poll workers to try to reach City Hall to find out where they're supposed to vote, pretty much in vain. Springfield actually happens to have the online lookup tool that Rasan Hall referred to earlier, except that the way you use it, if you're a voter, is you ask a poll worker at one of the 64 polling places to call down to City Hall so they can look up your status. And you just can't get through to City Hall because everybody's trying to do this. And all the groups that we saw waiting to vote, almost all people of color. So hassles and problems and confusion don't affect all voters equally. On the positive side, provisional ballots. The city seems to have quietly reversed its policy. Last year they were specifically refusing specific requests for provisional ballots from voters. This year they were granting the requests, and then even in some cases offering them proactively like they should be. So that was great to see. And also, I just need to report intrepid, excellent poll workers, very dedicated, but their hands were really tied by these infrastructure problems and the problems caused through bad planning at City Hall.
Thank you so much, Aaron. So right now, I should be sharing poll results. About 90% of the people that voted said they had a good experience with election protection. About 10% did not. If you want to send us some feedback, we'd certainly appreciate it. So next, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Sorry about that. We're going to, I was trying to give you another poll. Okay. I will try to get to it in a minute. So next we're going to hear from Cheryl Crawford, who is going to speak about potential reforms, and in the meantime, I will try to get this other poll up, which asks you about your experience on Election Day in Massachusetts and what problems you thought was most important. So while I'm trying to do that, we'll hear from Cheryl. Cheryl, are you there?
Good afternoon. Yes, I am. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you.
So my first slide.
You are on.
Great. Can you put up the first slide, Pam?
Yes, it's on. You want the next one?
No. I just don't see him. Okay. Anyway, as we look at what can be done, it's really helpful to consider how grocery stores and other retailers handle Lyme. It's not rocket science. So I'm not seeing the slides, Pam.
You're not seeing the slides.
Oh.
What are you seeing?
Quick poll.
Excuse me?
The results from the poll.
Okay. Now are you seeing it?
Now I am. Great. Thanks. Okay, next slide, please. Next.
Do you see it now?
Yes, I do. Thank you. First, I want to talk about price checks. You know, when you're standing in line and the person in front of you has a problem and they need a manager. This happens a lot in many states like Massachusetts that has bad voter registration lists. In other states, the problem is particularly bad because a lot of people don't even realize that they have a problem until they get to the front of the line. As a result, poll workers need to call the city or town hall, and so do the voters as well. Basically, for voter information, we're stuck with an election day hotline system, you know, while 41 other states are providing web access to places like www.wheredoivotema.com. It is not connected to the actual individual registration data. Next. With voter registration is one of the very few government services in Massachusetts that is still exclusively done on paper. Think about that. But not only that, if you had a problem with someone's registration 19 days before Election Day, it's too late because we have a fixed deadline here for all registration changes 20 days out. Many states let voters register online, and an increasing number have linked other states' web services to their voter registration, so that if you have to update your driver's license online, file your taxes, or apply for state benefits, you can register or update your registration at the same time, automatically. You know, many states have registration deadlines much closer to Election Day. And, of course, there's only one way to be absolutely certain. Be able to explain this, and should they even give this?
Too much background noise there.
Yes.
It's advisable that they even watch the news.
Stay on this slide, Pam. You know, Election Day registration or same-day registration is exactly what it sounds like. States with Election Day registration don't have checkout tables. Instead, they have a table to the side where people can register or update their old registration. And then they go and vote, while people who are already registered go ahead and vote. Election Day registration became the law last year in California and Connecticut. Too late for the 2012 elections, but they're rolling it out now. Election Day registration has been in place for about 40 years in Maine, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and for about 20 years in New Hampshire, Idaho, South Dakota, and Wyoming. Iowa, Montana, and Washington, D.C. have had same-day registration for just a few years. But quite simply, Election Day registration is the gold standard to ensure that every citizen can vote. It's also the only election reform association associated with the 4 to 8% increase in turnout in statewide elections. Next, my last slide here. Next, Pam. You know, so can I vote now, please? You know, Massachusetts is just one of the 15 states that neither on-demand absentee ballots or early voting. In Massachusetts, if you have to work all day on Election Day, you still can't vote absentee unless you will be out of the town in which you are registered from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. continuously. And that's one of the strictest rules in this country. In fact, even poll workers who help cities run elections can't legally vote absentee. It's pretty clear that if the state offered voting at 500 or so locations for the weekend before Election Day and the Monday before Election Day, you would see a much higher participation rate. On average, though, early voters still wait in line a little bit longer, about 20 minutes versus the 13 minutes nationwide. And that's according to the most recent research from Pew. There's a lot of excitement going on at the State House right now about plenty of these reforms mentioned. But at this point here, I just want to turn the mic back to Pam, who will take questions and talk about the next steps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. So next we're just going to very quickly talk about what's happening in the State House, what's going on next, and while I'm doing that, there will be another poll open about what you thought was the biggest problem. All of our organizations have been cooperating to look at potential reforms. All of them that Cheryl has just spoken have been filed for many years as independent bills and are now also in a big package that Jamie Eldridge has submitted in the past, and that we're working with Senator Feingold, who was the chair of the Elections Committee last year, to put together for this year. Last year, as many of you know, there was an elections package that dealt with auditing of election results, pre-registration of 16-year-olds. I do hear some noise in the background. If someone should be muted, if for some reason you're not, you can do *6 to mute yourself. The bill also contained pre-registration, extra training for election administrators, and the ability to download a form for voter registration. The Secretary of State actually took that provision and made it into law by himself through regulation. We weren't clear that he could do that, but he did. That's a good step. We'd like to make it all online. So we're hoping that folks are be interested in joining us in this fight, and we will be in touch about next steps in terms. We're going to be meeting as a coalition, but that's for organizations. For individuals, we will have a lobby day. Our organizations will be sending out alerts for you to write your legislators. There'll be many opportunities for people to get involved. Let me just unmute Cheryl very briefly to see if she wanted to add anything to that, and then we'll go to these polls. Cheryl, did you want to add anything to that?
To the legislation currently at the State House. No, I think you covered it pretty well, Pam.
Okay.
About all the excitement going on up there right now.
Yeah. Of course, we have new legislators to be sworn in, and many people are championing this issue because of the long lines which appeared everywhere. They're a real chaser for reform. Early voting is definitely gathering some steam. We need to make sure that it is in a way that we can isn't going to cause too much disruption. So I'm just going to. We have about 60% of people that have voted on this poll. I'm going to close it in just a second, post it for folks, and then we'll go on to one more, and then we'll have questions and answers. So here is the poll. You can see that most people felt long lines were the biggest problem, as well as problems with provisional balloting and inactive voters. Definitely huge problems. voters being in the wrong place. Thank you for answering that. So our next question is, what reforms are you most motivated to work for? Now, obviously, you may say all of them, but please just pick one that is most interesting to you. And then we'll give this about just about a minute, so if people can do that quickly, and then we'll go on to question and answers. I would ask, as we're doing question and answers, there's a little button that you can raise your hand. That will make it much easier. If that, for some reason, doesn't work, we'll just have a free-for-all. So we're at 50 seconds for this vote, and actually, I'm going to wow. We're getting a good vote on this one. Almost everybody has voted. 10 more seconds, and then I'm going to close it. All right, it is closed. So a lot of people enthusiastic about Election Day voter registration, registration modernization, and early and no excuse absentee voting. It's almost a tie between the three, with a little runner-up with audits. Of course, it isn't either or. We'll be working on all of these things, but it's nice to know what everybody is interested in. So now I'm going to do question and answer. I see a hand raised right now from Allison Kelly, and I am going to unmute all of the panelists and Allison so that she can ask her question. Allison? Allison Kennedy? I guess not.
No, I didn't. That wasn't me.
Oh, you have your hand raised. Okay. Barbara Lewis has a question.
Hi. Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Can you explain the reasoning behind the 16-year-old early voter registration? Why would we spend time working toward that? Some of our attention.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pre-registration process, so when you get your driver's license, you can register to vote at the same time. Once somebody votes in their first election, if it's at 18, you have a much higher percentage of voting going forward. These are our voters of tomorrow. We need to make it as easy and convenient as possible. A lot of times there's confusion currently if they go in and they sign up at that point to register to vote, think they are registered to vote, they're not, and get to the polls at 18 and can actually vote. So I think it's a great reform. There are, depending on how you count it, 18 or so other states that have it. Cheryl, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. You know, this will be a great way to get civics back in high school. And as Pam mentioned, having younger voters engage earlier in the process. And then also they don't risk that at the deadline to register to vote, at a time when it's critical for them to be doing college applications and FASB forms, financial aid. We don't want them to miss their first opportunity to vote because they're preoccupied and just happen to miss the voter registration deadline.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
All right, I have Michael Altman.
I'm here. I didn't raise my question. I didn't raise my hand, but
you have. Well, you did raise your hand, but it may have been an accident.
Should I ask a question?
If you have one.
Well, I just wondered, one of the choices wasn't something that's been mentioned by many, which is professionalizing people that work at the polls. and I just wondered why that was omitted.
Well, I'll say one, we only had a couple of, we only could pick 5 things, and this wasn't actually that I wrote the questions. But there's a lot of reasons. We have had poll worker training is something that our organizations have all supported for many, many years, and that would certainly help, and it was part of the bill. I think it just didn't think it was quite sexy enough to put on one of the lists. Anybody else?
Well, I wasn't thinking of just training. That there are, I mean, from what I read, a lot of countries in the world have people that are government employees who are trained, who are paid to work at polls, and who run elections in that way. There may not be a need for that in Massachusetts, but there's been a lot of people talking about that.
Well, we do have paid employees running elections. The town clerks, the elections officials, our actual workers, we could not maintain that workforce and pay for it. Should we pay them more? Perhaps. Getting that done would be very difficult. Unless Cheryl or Rasan or anybody else wants to take another crack on that, we're going to move to another question. Cheryl, do you want to say anything?
I just think that it's critical, that maybe we look into more deeper training for the poll workers, because I know they offer it to the poll workers, right, before they do the assignment. But, maybe we could, I know MassVOTE had their hand in redoing the poll workers handbook, and, perhaps we could look into some of the training of that.
Yeah, that's been a bill requiring training for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just quickly related to professionalization, bilingual poll workers, language access continues to be an issue in Springfield.
Yes, language access is very important. All right, Louis Cerrone? Cerrone, sorry.
That's okay. Hi. I'm concerned about federal candidates and the issue of voter suppression. And that is basically that my ability to vote, the identification or proof I need to vote, the ease or difficulty to vote on federal candidates is determined to some degree by the state that I vote in. And I am wondering whether there can be any uniform standard, at least as far as federal candidates are concerned, so that every 4 years you don't get different state legislatures and governors passing these voter suppression laws.
Well, that's a good question, and in fact there is legislation in Congress that continues to set a higher bar for states. We do have the Federal Voting Rights Act and the Help America Vote Act, which do set some standards. The Help America Vote Act was really one of the first that dealt directly with election laws, which have traditionally been the state's province, and frankly, even lower than that, many states have counties that actually have different rules across the board. But there are good bills that have been tending to require things like paper ballots, to set rules about better rules on provisional voting, about auditing election, all sorts of things. So I think one of the hurdles is sort of the state writers, and that not everybody wants their state to go by somebody else's rules. Any of the other panelists want to take that, or should we move on? Okay, let's go to Deborah Butler. If I'm not sure I can unmute you, Deborah, but I'll try. No, I can't. If you can try to talk, then no.
Pound *6 herself.
Yeah, she could try. I'm not sure. There's some people that I can see that they're not fully accessed, so they have their hand up, but I can't actually unmute them. We see one more. Katie Wang. Katie, are you on the phone?
Hi, yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. So I'm from the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund in New York City, and we're interested in language access, specifically with regard to Asian American voters. So I was wondering if Rasan or someone else could speak more generally about the language access issues that they saw in Massachusetts, perhaps including about the bilingual interpreters that someone else had mentioned before.
Sure. There were several instances in Worcester where there was a particular polling location, and I'm not recalling exactly which one, where we received reports that there was only one person that was available to provide language assistance there, and then that particular individual, who I believe was the warden of the polling location, went on a lunch break for several hours. We had the benefit of having some of the attorneys from the National Lawyers Committee come to the area to cover some of the areas out here that are Section 203 covered jurisdictions, and so they focused primarily on Holyoke, Springfield, Worcester, and then we had a few folks looking, I believe they were in the Lawrence, Lowell area. In regards to the Asian American community, I believe Quincy is the only 203 jurisdiction that requires Chinese language assistance, and we didn't have anyone in those locations. And from our hotline, the best we can tell, we did not get calls about the need for language assistance there, but that does not mean that that was not an issue there. We just did not hear about it.
So I put Katie on mute because there's a lot of background noise. Is there, and does anyone else have anything they want to say, or shall we move on?
I would just refer you to the language access legislation that's recently passed in your neighborhood in Suffolk County, Long Island. The Long Island Civic Engagement Table has been spearheading that, and they're doing amazing stuff, mobilizing traditionally underrepresented groups in Long Island. So I'd encourage you to check that out. It was covered in the New York Times recently.
So I think I can unmute Deborah now. Do you have a question, Deborah?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, my question is, I'm concerned about the lack of enforcement of Massachusetts election law. I've been frustrated when I speak to the Secretary of State's office. They don't seem able to enforce Massachusetts election law. So my next step is to file with the Attorney General's office, and I just wanted to see if that is a proper step to take.
I guess my question would be, is there a specific violation that you're concerned about when you say that?
Yes, the violation is that under election law that 6 voters can remove a warden, an election official, and that right was ignored in November.
Well, you know, there's no harm in writing the Attorney General if you want to have, I think, a discussion about specific issues. It's probably better to contact one of us after the webinar.
Great.
Yeah.
Will do.
Okay, good. Let's see, other questions. We can do about three more. We have Marlene O'Brien. Marlene?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. Is there a way, are we in any way joining up with some or reaching out to some Spanish language organization to help provide, observers who speak Spanish? I was in Lawrence, and 95% of the language I heard at the 7 polling places I, observed was Spanish. I don't speak a word, and
yeah.
I was wondering whether we can actively recruit for those areas where that's very necessary.
Very important, and I think we have tried, and we'll need to do a better job.
Yeah, I would say, and I know that in places like Worcester, Neighbor to Neighbor has a strong Latino membership, and they were able to provide some assistance. But again, that is a good point, and to the extent that we have contacts with Latino community organizations, we try to utilize them, but I think there's always room for improvement, and the more information and the more contacts we have, the better able we are to achieve that.
Reaching out to Hispanic politicians, Hispanic elected officials might help outside of, outside of the communities we're worried about.
Well, most of the statewide had their own election protections as well. So we were doing a grassroots effort and an external effort, but certainly there was a lot of other folks that were out there too.
Yeah, the problem is every observer from counterpart organizations like Common Cause, and not a single one of us spoke Spanish.
Yep.
It's really a major problem because it's impossible to understand certain things, of course.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for your feedback. We will try to do better next time. So let's see.
I would also just suggest on the Spanish-speaking, we look into how bilingual poll workers are allocated in a particular city or town. There's a very arcane, out-of-date, and really nonsensical formula for allocating bilingual poll workers in Springfield, and as a result, some places had plenty and some places had none.
We did pretty well, and I think Lawrence. Susan Brand, do you have a question? Susan Brand, a question?
Yes. This is actually Gail Horowitz. I wasn't able to get through on my phone, so I'm listening with Susan.
I see.
And I'm the one who's trying to raise my hand.
Okay.
So I basically coordinated the polls in New Bedford on Election Day.
Great.
And it was not a good situation. They had redistricted back earlier in 2012 and had sent out postcards that apparently were directing people to districts where they were being told that this was not their right district. At any rate, I don't need to go into all the details on it. My concern is that it's my impression that this is a heavily Democratic area, New Bedford. It's the 7th largest city in Massachusetts, and I'm hoping not, but we may have another election coming up shortly. And I didn't have the sense of a lot of acceptance of responsibility by City Hall down there, and it's impossible to know how many votes we lost in this election based on we had people who were able to go from poll, they were sent from poll to poll to poll, and were never able to vote. And obviously provisional ballots at that point doesn't really help you much because you could be casting your provisional ballot in the wrong poll. And frankly, they were also not, they were being told by the workers were being told by City Hall that they had given out too many provisional ballots already and they shouldn't give out anymore. So I'm just wondering, I felt some urgency about talking because this might be something that we really want to see what we can do about before what's potentially an election coming up.
Good point. Why don't you shoot us an email and we'll talk more later because it does sound concerning. And New Bedford has had problems on and off for some time, and we do know of plenty of problems with people showing up in the wrong place.
I found out about this call from Jerry McDonough, and I'm not sure. I can send Jerry an email. Is there someone in particular you're thinking I should send an email to?
You can send it to any of us, and we'll deal with it, either me or Rasan or anybody, really.
So I don't have your emails.
Well, mine is pwilmot@comicause.org.
Okay.
I'm rhall@lawyers.com. Oh, sure.
You know, why don't I just send it to Pam, and then, Pam, you can forward it to whomever you'd like.
Yep, I'll forward it to everybody. Have no fear.
Okay.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and who's going to be the lucky person is Patty Kellogg.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, quick question. Is there a publicly accessible database of the specific wards and precincts in which multiple complaints were reported? This seems like a pretty good follow-up to the question we just heard, because the transparency would seem to, you know, enable better public pressure for improvement. That's it.
From our perspective, unfortunately, there's not. We had the Our Vote Live database that we used. There was a new platform that was created specifically for this election, but there were technical difficulties on election day, so we had to revert to the old platform, which did not contain as much detail. And so unless a caller shared that information, or one of our call takers specifically asked for the ward and precinct, some of the entries do not have it. But if you go to 866 Our Vote, no, I'm sorry, that's not it. It's ourvotelive.com. It'll allow you to search, and if you search the reports, and you can filter it by state, that's about as good as you can get. And then
thank you.
So, and in terms of the rest of our election system, so we got I thought it was 2,500 calls. Not all of those were necessarily logged, but that is a very small subset of the problems that were reported. They would have gone through city and town halls. They would have gone some to the Secretary of State's office. There probably could be a FOIA request of some kind, but that is not, there is no database other than ours, well, actually Rasan's, that tracks that. It is, and that is unfortunate. Well, it is the top of the hour, and we promised that we would get you out in an hour. We thank everybody for participating, especially all the panelists and all of you who volunteered on Election Day. If you still have questions or comments, I should have put a slide that had all our emails, but I didn't, and apologize for that. Feel free to email me, pwilmot@comicause.org. Rasan also just mentioned his, rhall@lawyerscom.org. And we could go down the list, but I think it's going to get too hard for people to write it down unless somebody anybody wants to jump up. And we will be back in touch to invite you to participate in the legislative process as we go forward with reform through lobby days, through writing your legislators, through making a meeting, and folks can also, if they're interested in volunteering, contact any of our organizations for help to help with research and producing materials and that sort of thing to help organize these events. That would be very much grateful. And you can Google any of us and get our email addresses. So thank you so much. Any panelists want to say anything else?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We will see you next time.
Have a great day. Happy holidays.